Welcome back. This is Dan Havey with CF Ninja Hacks, and in this video today, we are going to take a quick look, very brief look at the history of the internet. I think it's important to know how things came about over time. Also, we're going to look at a little bit of the market share currently today, and then we're going to look at a mistake I see a lot of people doing by putting in this non-standard notation into their pages, and I'll show you again throughout the history here why we don't need that anymore. So way back in 1991, the internet became publicly available. I say way back in 1991, but it right now is 2022, February 28th of 2022. So it's only been around for slightly over 20 years. And of course, once you release the internet out to the public, you got to be able to see what's on the screen. So the next thing that came out 2 years later in 93 was HTML was released, and you'll see in later videos about how important HTML is because it's really the backbone, the structure of which you see on the screen. In ClickFunnels terms, it's your sections, rows, columns, and then elements. That is the HTML, and that was invented in 1993. Now, currently we are at HTML5, version number 5, and that came out in 2014. So again, even with HTML5, which is the latest version, that still has been on the market for over 8 years. Then, of course, besides having the internet, we have HTML so we can see what's on the screen. They came out with the first browser. I think there was other minor ones before this, but the first major browser came out in 1993 as well. It was a project done at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. What do they call it here? Illinois Urbana-Champaign. That's what it's called. And so they had that project there, and they released Mosaic at that point. It was later shut down, or they no longer worked on it, more accurately, after about 1997. It was pretty much gone and had been taken over then by Netscape Navigator, which was released in 1995. But also in 1995, we had our first version of Microsoft Internet Explorer, which they licensed their software actually from Mosaic. So the original Mosaic really, in many ways, became Internet Explorer. Also in that same year, first versions of JavaScript was released as well, and we'll talk a lot more about JavaScript in much, much later lessons. But again, here we had Netscape Navigator came out in 95, and it was later acquired by AOL in a huge purchase that I think ended up going sideways on AOL, if I recall, but that's a long time ago already. So then in 1996, now we finally have CSS. So before that, you had HTML on the screen, so you basically had boxes and you had text, but you had no CSS to tell it what to look like. So you didn't have the colorations like you have now in the background colors and all the, everything that we are going to go through in this course. None of that really existed when HTML first came out. And so that came out in 1996. And the latest version is CSS3, came out in 1999. So we're talking, well, I guess up here I said it was 20 plus years ago. Actually, this is 30 plus years now for 1991. And so this here would be 23 years ago was the latest major update to CSS. And so then in 1998, Netscape, which was already having problems, we'll get into that in a minute, they formed what they called Mozilla, which was, Mozilla is short for Mozkilla, which was Mosaic Killer, which what they were trying to do was to get rid of Mosaic and also probably suggest that they're also trying to get rid of Microsoft because we see the next year here, in 2001, a couple of years later, I should say, the DOJ sued Microsoft because what they were doing is they were trying to put Netscape out of business, and by saying that the they had to bundle together the Microsoft operating system and Internet Explorer, and that they couldn't be separated. So therefore, if they couldn't be separated, Netscape or any other browsers could not be on the Microsoft computers. Well, they lost that case, and basically that was the beginning of the end for Microsoft when it came to their web browsers, because 2 years later, Safari was released, and our current version of Safari is number 14, and you'll understand why we care about that in a minute here. Then the next year, Mozilla's Firefox was released. We're now up to version 97. In 2006, the jQuery JavaScript library was released, and that's what I generally use whenever I'm doing any kind of coding in JavaScript. jQuery library is so much easier to use, and so that's been around now for 16 years. And then finally in 2007, we had the iPhone was released, and then in 2008, Chrome was released, as well as the Android devices were released. And then it wasn't until 2017 that Microsoft finally gave up on Internet Explorer, basically deprecated at that point at version 11, and now they have what they call Edge. But even at that, I don't know what they built Edge on originally, but then in 2020, they went to the Chromium technology, which is what Chrome is based on. So throughout the history of Microsoft here, all their browsers are basically based off of their competitors' software. So that's part of the reason I don't use Microsoft anymore. I'm just completely an Apple guy at this point in my life. So let's take a look here at market share. So on desktops, Chrome has 66% of the market share, and Safari has 10%. Now, for me personally, I run a Mac, but I run everything on Chrome. I don't like Safari at all on my desktop, but on my mobile device, I use Safari for the web browser on there, and that's where you see here on all devices, Safari has 19% of the market share, mostly taking away from Edge and Firefox, which are almost not used at all on mobile devices. And these numbers are as of December of 2021, so they're only 2 months old. Now let's take a look at something down here in the bottom right-hand corner. I call it non-standard notation because I couldn't find any other better term for it. And you've probably seen this if you looked at any kind of CSS, or if you went out to like a gradient generator or something like that on the web and you pulled it off. A lot of times you'll see it say, in our case here, we're going to use an example of WebKit transition, but in the case of a gradient, it would be like gradient transit or WebKit gradient, Moz gradient, MS gradient, something like that. And then the last one would be just the gradient, if you had pulled that off a gradient generator. Well, what WebKit refers to is WebKit is the technology that runs Chrome, Edge, Safari, and Internet Explorer. So that's what runs that. And then Moz, of course, is run on Mozilla, Microsoft on Microsoft. That's what it means. The reason they did this originally was because as the CSS was growing over time, you see here it started off we went to CS3 in 1999, WebKit couldn't keep up, didn't have all the functionality that CSS3 would allow. So they had to build in their own functionality in order to get it to work. But the thing is, all of this has been deprecated. You see here in one case here, 2013, the other one in 2012. So we're basically 10 years ago since any of these have been necessary. Now, I say they're not necessary unless somebody hasn't updated their browser on their computer for 10 years. And I don't know a lot of people who have computers that are more than 10 years old, but even if they do, chances are they have updated their browser since then, because in this case, for Chrome, it goes up to version 20 of Chrome. Well, if we come down here, Chrome is currently at version 98. On Mozilla, it goes up to version 15 of Mozilla. Mozilla is currently on version 97. So as you can imagine, these are no longer necessary. And in fact, it's gotten to the point where if you go to Mozilla developer itself, so it's developer.mozilla.org, you can see right here it says WebKit transition, and it says flat out, this is deprecated. this feature is no longer recommended, even though I still see it all over the internet that people put it out there. So you're basically putting bad, unnecessary code into your site if you're using WebKit or Moz or MS at all. But it says here, avoid using it and update existing code if possible. See the compatibility table at the bottom of this page to guide your decision. And then here it talks about how this is non-standard. The feature is non-standard and not on standards track, and it's not being developed anymore either. So again, anytime you see WebKit or Moz, pretty much you don't need it. But in this case here, we have WebKit transition. You could come in here to Mozilla's developer, and you come in here and you see, okay, is it supported? And the thing is, no, it's not. So it was never supported on Edge, Firefox, or Internet Explorer, and Chrome 2 through 36, I guess it was supported on, but no longer is. But another way you can look at this is you can go to the property itself inside of Mozilla Developer, and you can look here and you say, okay, since what version was transition good inside of the Chrome browser? Well, it says here since version 26. Well, we're on 98. Same thing with Edge. Edge is at 98 as well because, again, they're using the Chromium-based technology. And so it doesn't need the WebKit in front of it either. Firefox is 16, whereas, again, we're up to 97 on the version there, so therefore it would not be necessary. So I just wanted to show you that because a lot of times I will see this still to the day in the code, and it's really not necessary. And you can find out if it's necessary or not by simply coming into Mozilla and checking out the table here to let you know what version. Now, if it were to say, like version 90 or version 80 or something, then what you want to do is you want to go out and Google and see, okay, how long ago was that? Was version 80, was that a year ago because they've had so many updates, or was it 5 years ago? If it's 5 years ago or more, I would say, if somebody doesn't update their browser, and if somebody hasn't bought a new computer in 5 years, they're probably used to seeing a lot of garbage on the screen. So I think you're better off not putting it in whenever possible. So that is all I wanted to talk about here today, a little bit of a brief history of the internet, of the web browsers, and of the operating systems, not the operating systems, I'm sorry, the different coding languages here, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So again, as always, if you got any questions, let me know.